Frankie Edgar is definitely among the most seasoned fighters in the UFC. With a career stretching nearly 15 years, he's managed to prove himself as one of the top names. Recently, he reflected on his career a bit, giving fans some great details about his journey. In today's video, we'll discuss everything that Edgar shared with us, and a lot more. So let's dive right in. Starting off, Rumble in the Bronx, Frankie's first MMA fight. The fight happened in a Bronx boxing gym a few months after Frankie graduated from college in 2005. On a scorchingly hot July night. It was hot, noisy, and chaotic, and lacked air conditioning. In the stands, he saw people drinking 40s. There were no medical personnel or an ambulance anywhere in the building, and there were absolutely no rules. One fighter was substituted for a no-show, and he competed while wearing denim shorts. No breaks would be allowed throughout the battles, which would consist of 15-minute rounds. He said that all he did was simply say yes. The real question is, why did he go there? It was connected to the way his collegiate wrestling career had ended. He had big expectations for himself but didn't meet them. Frankie lost in triple overtime in the blood round, which decides the top 8 in each weight class, during his final year in the NCAA tournament. He would have been an All-American if he had triumphed in that contest. Because of this, Edgar was understandably crushed. The game left him with a sour aftertaste. Then something happened that caused everything to change completely. The Ultimate Fighter made its debut that spring. He recalls noting that Josh Koscheck, who he knew, was a part of the Season 1 cast. Frankie knew him as both wrestled in Western Pennsylvania for Clarion and for Edinburgh University respectively. Their teams had engaged in many matches of wrestling. Next, why did Frankie decide to continue competing? When he saw Josh on the TV competing, he made the decision to continue. He didn't view it as a profession. Rather, he saw it as a way to keep competing. Frankie began training in the additional MMA disciplines besides wrestling right around graduation. And only after 3 or 4 weeks, one of the gym's teachers suggested an upcoming underground mixed martial arts event in New York and asked if he wanted to compete. Edgar didn't hesitate and said yes. He wanted to go in there and see whether he had what it took, since he was a plumber who worked full-time. When he arrived in the Bronx, the gym was nearly full of people waiting to see his opponent, a New Yorker. He'd heard that his opponent had an MMA background. Everyone in the back was stating that he was on the UFC's radar. The audience was screaming and yelling at him as Frankie walked out. In addition, as soon as the battle began, the man had him up in a tie grip and delivered 2 rather powerful knees to the face, but he managed to take him down twice, and the second time he headbutted him while he was on top of Frankie. No laws, right? Frankie eventually reached full mount and began throwing punches till he won. After the fight, his eye was drooping and he could feel the air beneath his cheek and scalp. His relatives couldn't believe what they saw when he got out. He had shattered his orbital bone when they transported him to the hospital. That's where his MMA journey started. Moving on, was Frankie not tough enough? About a year into his MMA career, he was 6-0. Although he did survive his fight with Jim Miller in Atlantic City, Miller managed to kick him in the head and take a bit of his ear off. So when Frankie got the call to go to Hollywood, Florida to test out for Season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter, also known as Tough, his ear was damaged. When he arrived and introduced himself to Dana White, he was told right away that he didn't look like a 55er. For the grapple round, they paired him up with a giant of a guy, and he passed. When he later hit the pads for matchmaker Joe Silva, Frankie believed he'd also impressed him. The final stage was speaking with the TV producers, who assured him they would follow up with him. He thought he was accepted, but the call never came. Naturally, he was unhappy, but by the time the season was broadcast, he had already joined the UFC. Because of that, it was simpler to watch the show, and it had one of the finest seasons ever. Back then, there was a lot of drama on the show that had nothing to do with fight preparation. Had he stayed, he didn't know if he would have handled it all too well. He said that he doesn't consider himself a tough man, but he did live by certain beliefs, and so Edgar was grateful for how everything turned out. Following up, surviving and winning his UFC debut. Soon after his tough audition, he received a contract to compete at UFC 67 in Las Vegas. Tyson Griffin and he squared off, and he won by decision, but it wasn't an easy victory. He locked in a knee bar at the last second, and it was tight. There was no way he was tapping, since he was sure he was winning with the judges. Twice he heard the knee pop, but in the final 30 seconds, he managed to wiggle his knee through the fulcrum point, and he made it to the horn, striking his leg repeatedly to finish strong. It's been reported to him that throughout the fight, Joe Rogan's commentary on the television broadcast switched from praising his hand speed and footwork to referring to them as 2 wrestlers. Frankie desired this for his MMA career. He always listed himself as a freestyle fighter when the UFC would ask how they wanted to be recognized back then. To him, being able to accomplish everything makes someone a genuine mixed martial artist. He wanted to compete against the finest stand-up fighter in the world, and if he had to wrestle with the finest best grappler in the world on the ground, he wanted to do that too. Up next, beating a legend for the UFC Lightweight Championship. In April 2010, UFC 112 was hosted in an outdoor stadium created especially for the event in Abu Dhabi. That's when Edgar received his opportunity at the championship against BJ Penn. There hasn't been another UFC fight event staged outside since that initial one. He saw how big of a legend BJ was when he traveled to Abu Dhabi for the UFC press tour a few weeks before the fight. Everybody over there lusted after the champion. BJ treated him with respect the entire time, while everyone else treated him almost as if he didn't exist. They simply adored BJ. This is a man, after all, who used to suck his opponent's blood off his gloves to celebrate victories. Frankie was brought in as a lamb for sacrifice. As a result of getting his hand raised and having the belt placed around his waist, this ended up being the favorite of his 35 professional fights. That was fantastic and long overdue. He finished second in the state wrestling competition in high school. In the high school nationals, he came in second as well. He came close to being an All-American in college, but fell short. It was one of the most satisfying days of his life to finally achieve my ambition of dominating the globe. The UFC swiftly scheduled a rematch for around 4 months after he won. Frankie would have to demonstrate his superiority to BJ once more, but he didn't really object to it, since he believed you should always put yourself on the line. And for the rematch, he had a different perspective. Lastly, never thought the time would come, Frankie's retirement fight. He wasn't sure what to do after his previous fight when Chito Vera knocked him out. He was going through a difficult time and wasn't sure if he'd fight once again, but he informed his manager, Ali Abdelaziz, over the summer that he wanted to fight. He brought up the Madison Square Garden match in November. Edgar thought that a match against Dominick Cruz would be reasonable. They're the same age, were both previous champions, and have comparable career paths. Despite the differences in their methods, they both come from wrestling backgrounds, are quite active, and have excellent conditioning. It looked like a winning combination. Cruz fought in August, though, and because he was knocked out in that contest, their scheduling for an autumn meeting was off. He then urged Ali and Mark Henry, his trainer, to find him a fight with anyone. At UFC 281, Chris Gutierrez and he were matched up, so he chose to make this his final fight because it was in New York, near enough for a large number of friends and family to attend. It's appropriate that this significant moment in his life was taking place at the Garden because he felt at home there. He competed there for the first time at UFC 205 in 2016, and much of his preparation for the fight took place at Royce Gracie's facility on 30th Street, which is only a few streets away. Even after the fight, Edgar hasn't walked away from the sport, and he'll remain involved. Frankie plans on opening an MMA school in his hometown. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts on Frankie Edgar's long journey in the UFC? Comment below. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.